The history of the First United Methodist Church started with a bang. And horses. Lots of horses. On April 22, 1889, about 50,000 people looking for a new life rode, ran, walked, and one man is rumored to have bicycled into the new Oklahoma Territory. Sprinkled among 100 to 150 new residents of Edmond, 14 Methodists started making plans to build the new church and were soon joined by their new minister.
It was one August afternoon in 1889 that Reverend J.E. Roberts of Darlington Mission Circuit rode into Edmond in a $2 cart drawn by a little $5 horse.
The first history of the church compiled by Mrs. Mary Weaver.
The foxes had holes, and the birds of the air had nests, but the Methodist itinerant of those pioneer days had nowhere to lay his head until Aaron Fretz, a charter member, offered to share his 8x8 shanty with a 2-foot board for a bed and the scanty fare of a pioneer. There was no building in which he could preach, but in a few months a small schoolhouse was built where the services were held.
The small schoolhouse on 2nd Street was built due to the efforts of the Methodist women who, upon arrival in Edmond, formed the Ladies' School Aid Society. Its president, Jenny Forster.
On a summer's day in 1889, I marched into Brown's Lumber Company and ordered enough lumber on credit. We set to work immediately to pay back the lumber bill. We badgered our husbands as well as other town merchants and citizens. It got so bad, I'm sure the businessmen felt like running out the back door when they saw me entering the front door.
The Ladies' Aid Society also raised money through ice cream socials, weaving rugs, and holding dinners and suppers. The 1889 Thanksgiving night game Supper and Ball, as described by the Edmond Sun newspaper, raised enough money to finish paying the teacher for the school year.
The meal, which was prepared by the ladies and served in the newly completed unoccupied livery stable, was followed by a dance in the schoolhouse. The town sportsmen had provided the game of 132 quail, 11 prairie chickens, 22 rabbits, 7 turkeys, 2 squirrels, 2 raccoons, and 1 possum.
Because of the efforts of the Ladies' Aid Society, tuition didn't have to be collected from the students, making this a free public school. Plans for the First Methodist Episcopal Church started in late 1889, according to the Edmond Sun's December 19th edition.
The members of the M.E. Church organized last Saturday night, and we understand sufficient money was subscribed to build a church and a parsonage, and steps will be taken at once to secure a suitable minister to preside over the congregation.
Mary Weaver continues the story.
These plans were formed under the pastorate of the Reverend Lester Doane in the spring of 1890, but carried out by Reverend Joseph Brooks, who labored energetically serving as main carpenter as well as preaching. His salary was paid out of the building fund.
The Edmond News said the building at Broadway and Hurd would be 28 feet by 50 feet.
And judging from the plans and specifications, it will be one of the best in the territory.
Nearly a year and a half later, the dreams of Joseph Brooks were coming to completion. The Edmond Sun, October 23, 1891.
The M.E. Church building reminds us of a beehive to see the 15 carpenters all hard at work. On every corner and projection is a man or two at work. Reverend Brooks agreed to have it finished by a certain time, and it looks as if he meant business the way the nails are driven.
Then, a week later,
Reverend Brooks is still busy with the building of the M.E. Church so as to complete it by the first of the coming week. The railing and altar is being made of native walnut. The wood is one of the finest specimens we have produced within a few miles of Edmond. On Tuesday, Reverend Brooks was, quote, unquote, pounded in a very agreeable manner at his home on the west side by members of his church. Everyone carried a pound of something useful, and thus gladdened the heart of their beloved minister and estimable wife. A very pleasant evening was spent on a social chat, the occasion being the 31st birthday of Mr. Brooks.
On August 28, 1892, Reverend J.B. Cronk oversaw the building's dedication. But Mary Weaver says it all might not have happened without help from the Ladies' Aid Society of the Methodist Church coming to help under a new leader.
It was in 1890 that Melissa Thatcher, wife of Richard Thatcher, of whom the record speaks so highly, joined the class. She was a devoted Christian, possessing many strong traits of character. It may be said she did what she could to help finish this church.
It was Mrs. Thatcher's husband who would help usher in a new chapter in the Methodist Church. The little church on Broadway and Hurd was growing quickly, welcoming new Edmondites in the years before Oklahoma became a state. The new building was less than a month old when it formed a partnership which would last to this day. The state's first institute for higher learning was getting ready to take in new students, but had no place to teach.
The Territorial Board of Education met on October 5, 1891, and decided that the school would open November 2, 1891.
Historian L. Jeston Hampton.
Reverend Joseph Brooks tendered the Methodist Church, then in construction, for use as the normal school, without cost for a term of 8 months. The offer was accepted and a contract signed. The opening date was postponed to November 9th because the church was not ready for use.
23 students met for the first time in the ME Church. The 2-year normal school was for teacher training under the auspices of Professor Richard Thatcher. Central State College graduate Molly Ruth Bottoms, who became a member of the church in 1917, talks about the first bell supposedly used by Richard Thatcher to call students to the Territorial Normal School.
The large bell hung in the belfry steeple of the first church building erected by the Methodists in Edmond soon after the run of 1889. This was a one-room wooden structure painted white with belfry tower and spire lifted above the front enterprise.
At least one major celebrity made a visit to the ME Church on February 15, 1905. Standing at 6 feet 175 pounds, Carrie Nation was an imposing figure in the women's temperance movement. The infamous opponent of alcohol took time out from her smashing of beer bottles in local saloons with her signature hatchet to speak at the little church in downtown Edmond. The self-described bulldog running along at the feet of Jesus, barking at what he doesn't like, prompted this write-up in the Edmond Sun.
The temperature was 16 degrees below zero on February 15, 1905, leaving some wags to suggest that a recent visit to Edmond by Carrie Nation, who lectured at the ME Church, had made hell freeze over.
By 1905, more space was needed in the ME Church, and Dosia Grace Verdon, the wife of then-Pastor A.M. Verdon, wrote the following letter in the hopes of raising funds.
We are poor, and our little church in the early days of Oklahoma is entirely too small to accommodate the crowds who wish to worship with us. Our people are poor, and we are in a new country. It means much to Oklahoma Methodism to have a strong society here and sufficient room to accommodate the crowds who come. Professor Oscar Lehrer has given us 20,000 copies of sheet music, Oklahoma. We present a copy to you. Send us 25 cents to build a new church.
The $15,000 project wasn't going to come cheap, and not just by selling sheet music for the University of Oklahoma band march. The fundraising for the venture was reported in 2 of Edmond's newspapers.
The next few days have been exceeding busy ones for Reverend Verdon.
The Edmond Sun, July 5, 1905.
With the assistance of some of the members of his congregation, has succeeded in raising $2,500 for the creation of a new church building here. Dr. Ridey, presiding elder of this district, has promised Reverend Verdon that when $3,200 have been subscribed, he will give $1,000. Dr. Verdon expects to go east in September and visit 10 different conferences with the object of raising money for the new church.
And from the Edmond Enterprise, March 15, 1906.
Immediately after the conclusion of the sermon, Dr. Forbes began the financial part of the morning service and announced that contributions to discharge the remaining indebtedness on the new church building were then in order. The plan suggested by Reverend Verdon was that of interest-bearing $40 bonds to run for 40 months. It was not long until a great deal of the excitement prevailed and bonds began to be taken in blocks of 2 and 3. Although the majority of them came from one to an individual. Then amounts of $20, $15, $10, and $5 were called for, and contributions came in rapidly. Dr. Forbes, all the while, keeping the congregation in a good humor by running fire of witticisms and stories. Shortly before 1 o'clock, Dr. Forbes brought the morning service to a close. The basket offering was taken, and when the audience filed out of the house, it was found $1,500 had been raised.
In 1905, the little frame church was turned halfway around to serve as a league and Sunday school room. A brick building was joined to this with a seating capacity of nearly 1,000 and named the Sarah Riley Memorial Church after the mother of District Superintendent Riley, who donated $1,000 to the renovation. It would stay like this for more than 2 decades before tragedy struck. For nearly 4 decades, the Methodist Episcopal Church on Broadway and Hurd welcomed newcomers to the territory and state of Oklahoma. The late 20s brought events of celebration and tragedy. On December 6, 1925, under the guidance of Reverend A.F. White, the church celebrated its 36th anniversary of the organization of the church. Mary Weaver recalls the event.
This was considered one of the red-letter days of the church, when many who were formerly connected with the church gathered in from all parts of the state. The splendid program of the day was climaxed by the burning of the note, which cleared the church parsonage of all indebtedness.
In October 1927, Reverend George Q. Fenn came as pastor. Upon the third Sunday, when Reverend Fenn preached to an overcrowded house, he made this remark to the congregation.
We could push this east wall and make room for all.
How little did he realize that this prophecy would come true, but in such a different manner. That same afternoon, the church burned to the ground, including all furnishings and records. A board meeting was held only a couple of hours before the fire was discovered by 5 men.
Jonas Martin, Hubert Lynch, Gilbert Love, Ted Cronkite, and me, Walter Marks, were driving by the church in a car when we saw the flames. We turned in the alarm, then returned to the building and carried out one of the pianos.
The Edmond Sun reported that the fire evidently started in the doors between the Sunday school room and the main building, as these doors were involved in flames and a stove near the doors was burning at its full capacity. The cause of the fire was blamed on the heat from the stove. While the cost of the Sarah Riley Memorial Church was $15,000, it was only insured for $7,000, with no coverage on furnishings. Again, Mary Weaver.
Real tragedy was written on the faces of those who watched the burning of this building, around which clustered so many fond memories. Memories of those who had given their hearts to God, memories of beloved pastors who had preached the gospel, some of whom had passed to a better world. Here, where the last sad rites were performed over our dear ones, where lives had been united in marriage. But all of this was wiped out in a few moments. Also, the bell, whose deep tones rang out each Sabbath day, shared the same fate. This bell, the pride of Reverend Verdon, who purchased it, like him, its voice had been forever hushed.
The services in the following Sundays were held in the high school auditorium. Within a few days, the congregation began making plans to build a new church on a different site and soon selected Hurd and Jackson. The land was owned by Earl Flesher, who promised to move his house and garage within 60 days. The original estimate would be $40,000. Under the efficient leadership of Reverend George Fenn, plans were drawn and accepted. He received $25 as a gift from the Federated Church of America for submitting the best planned church under $100,000. On March 8, 1928, Reverend Fenn made a plea to his congregation through an article in the Edmond Sun.
A new church building is such an asset to a community that, of course, everybody wants to help all they can. And to make this easy, the pledges to the new church fund may be paid over a period of 20 months, monthly. Next Sunday morning, the sermon subject will be, Where There Is No Vision, the People Perish.
It was soon learned the cost of the new church would be $60,000, not $40,000, and the moment was captured by a reporter from the Edmond Sun.
When Bishop Waldorf announced that it would be necessary to raise that amount, I just said to myself, it can't be done. After already given $40,000, the sum of $20,000 cannot be raised today. But I was agreeably mistaken. It was subscribed in less than a half hour. I noticed that among the subscribers were a large number from the country surrounding Edmond. I think these people showed a wonderfully generous spirit and a profound interest in the cause of religion in the city and community. In fact, the amount was oversubscribed, and in order to keep the solicitors from bringing up more subscriptions, Bishop Waldorf said, "Let's sing, 'Praise God from whom all blessings flow.'"
The cornerstone for the present-day First United Methodist Church of Edmond was laid on December 30th, 1928. The church, which was described as a magnificent, beautiful, modern building, one that would do credit to a city twice as large as Edmond, was dedicated on June 9th, 1929.